Here's another interesting, perhaps some would call anomaly. The government recently gazetted some hiked fees for access to government services. That happened last week, Sam. Then you did, a data point on it and took us through what those are. Then days later, it was revised because apparently, the outcry of Kenyans, it's hearing the voice of the people. A few points to note is that the increases were far, far higher than the reductions. And, in certain instances, services that were free, as they should be from government, are now charged. But we're being told, well, there's been a reduction of the same. So, Sam, that's also been a roller coaster.
Yes.
And then we're up and then we're down. And then, oh, wait, we're hearing the people. And then you gazette something and then you're calling for public participation. And it's also been a crazy week for, in this respect.
It was an interesting week, exactly 7 days, because the first Gazette notice went out on 7th of November. And I remember the first time we received that, because I think it was on a Wednesday, and you're trying to locate it on the Kenya Law Report, and you couldn't find it. I tried to source for it. You get a copy that is not very clear, so you're even uncertain whether it's the genuine one or not. But there was no denial. Then ultimately, a few sources confirmed that indeed that was the actual position. And you remember that time there was actually very many jokes of people saying that it's going to cost you more to even get married because for a marriage certificate, the price was going to go up way higher. Little did people know that actually marriages are not registered at the Citizen Services or the Immigration Department. That will have to take you to the Attorney General's office. So nothing has happened to the cost of a marriage certificate yet. Or maybe I haven't seen it.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Well, so for now...
Yeah.
So, did you see that... That comedian who said, "Siniluambia moe, siniluambia mtafute passport." So for now, simuoe sai before, just like panyaraka. Who knows?
You didn't just go there. Yeah. So looking at those rates, and of course, there was a lot of heated reaction online. People saying, I mean, an ID has been free. Why are you charging me 1,000 shillings to get one? If I lose one and you want to replace it at 2,000 shillings, why are you doing that? For a passport that has been costing 4,500, now you want to raise it to 7,500. That is 75% more. And of course, very little answers were coming. Eventually, 7 days later, you see the reduction as for the gazetted rates.
Yes.
So the rates have been revoked. Then there's a new Gazette notice, different from what was, but on very minimal rates. But at the same time, the question remains. There are people who can't afford to register for an ID. So they say that what will be happening is that there are those that, what is that word?
Indigent.
Yes, that one. That if you prove that you cannot pay, then you'll be allowed to register without paying. So what the ministry has not told Kenyans is that they have a target of over 500 million shillings, which is more than 500 million shillings. It is contained in the budget, the Appropriations Act of 2023-2024. So ministries or departments were given a responsibility to increase their appropriations in aid. This means the revenue they collect from giving services. So the increment for this financial year is more than 500 million shillings. So every department has a responsibility to figure out how do you collect that money, how do you increase it. And so the Citizen Services Department is coming up with those increased rates just to be in a position to achieve that. But at the same time, as you say, the question of public participation, because it's strange that after people have reacted the way they did, they say that now the departments are responsible to make sure that they conclude the public participation by the 10th. But they're also saying that the new rates that have been gazetted, which are effective 1st of January 2024, have taken into account the reactions that came from the initial one. So even if this public participation is to happen and close by 10th of December, and you have already gazetted rates to take effect 1st of January, So what is supposed to happen?
Yeah.
And who is supposed to keep tabs of that? Because after 10th of December, we're supposed to wait for another gazette notice to revoke the one that has just been gazetted. Or what exactly is supposed to be happening?
And why was there no public participation for the first gazette notice to begin with? It's interesting that you've mentioned the idea of targets, and I think we've said it here on the show before. Targets are all well and good. Where is that money going to, though? Does it go towards provision of services? Or could that money likely go towards repayment of debt, which we know is something that is on the government's mind, particularly at this time? The issue of then persons who are Kenyan, right, having to prove or to go through some sort of process to prove that they are unable to afford the new amounts that have been gazetted so as to be given a waiver or a discount or, you know, whatever it is, then again goes towards the basic human rights of an individual. So you have to prove that you are Kenyan and that you cannot afford to be Kenyan because of a basic document, which is your national identity card, which is an inalienable right. You are a Kenyan. You should be able to get an ID, which then gives you access to all the other government services, right? Mm-hmm. You cannot get a passport without an ID. You are not Kenyan. You are not a citizen of any state of the world if you do not have an ID. And so now you put a cost to it, and then you say, well, if you cannot afford it, you need to prove to us. Prove what?
And you remember...
That you were Kenyan?
At the point that registration, I mean, getting an ID was made free,
yeah.
It is because a lot of Kenyans had been disenfranchised.
Yes.
Well, at that time, there was also a target to make sure that as many collect IDs so that they can register to vote, and then we have more votes voting for whatever political side it was that time. But also, this question of ID, the ID politics have been, they are very painful in some areas, especially what was traditionally marginalized, to an extent that you find there are areas to date. For them to get an ID, it takes a process. There's a vetting process that has to happen. It is not the same across the country.
So now you add this layer onto that.
But of course, sometimes there are good reasons, especially why people need to be vetted, especially if you have counties that are next to the borders and they're insecurity concerns, then it is important to really vet the background of this person. But now the cabinet secretary is saying, and I want to quote him, the intended revised charges, fees and levies are informed by the need for Kenya's self-reliance in financing the national budget to win the country from unsustainable debt that poses great threats to our sovereignty and the dignity of future generations.
There it is.
So this is a very interesting statement that, yes, the appropriations in aid said, we want you to raise your revenues by this much this financial year. But this explanation, so how does this settle down? How does it sit with someone who is coming from that unfortunate situation and needs some of these services? I see a service they have introduced about issuance of an express passport. It has not been there, and it's being rated at 30,000 shillings. So sometimes you may need to travel because of an emergency.
Medical even.
It could be medical emergency. So for it to be expressed so that you get it the same day at 30,000 shillings, I thought there was a place for expediting processes based on how urgent it is.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, you know, what you've talked about with respect to self-reliance and to debt, once again, governments are responsible to their citizens for providing basic services. It cannot be target-based, commercial even, you know, that for me is the interesting part. I want us to listen to the Attorney General, who, while speaking during the State of the Nation address, I believe, apparently, alione view sasa pia.
When I saw those changes last night actually, I was also surprised at the rates at which they were being increased. But I think a lot of consultation is happening. So I just want to tell Kenyans what they have said through social media, through various other medium, has been heard. and without having to say much, let them have faith.
Thank you.
It is being had.
Thank you.
Yes.
Linus?
It's interesting, and while the Cabinet Secretary for Interior rescinded this revoked, basically revised it, and to allow public participation, and then says that this should take effect in January next year. I'm just wondering about the sustainability of this as a business model. Yeah, you want to generate revenue. How many times does one actually need to
apply for an ID?
Replace a lost ID? What if they don't lose it the next month? Yeah.
Maybe you're giving people ideas.
And
now.
then you're talking of hiking and relying on passport costs, and a passport is valid for 10 years. Yeah, so what happens to debt repayment for 10 years? I think some of this reasoning should really be mindful of the basic intelligence of Kenyans. I don't think we can repay our debt by increasing the cost of replacing an ID. And that is why, Kenyans went out and joked about things which we should not really be joking about at all. Because I saw some saying, hey, the Likoni ferry is actually free. And don't let the government know. I actually don't think it's a joke. If we actually think we can repay our debt by increasing the cost of basic services like a national ID, which you replace and somebody may be careful to keep it for a lifetime, or a passport, which is valid for 10 years, there is something that we need our national head examined, as our collective head as a country. And, the wisdom came, and late enough for the Cabinet Secretary. And I'm waiting to see how this will play out. When he says, we'll do public participation, but they'll take effect next year. So what is public participation for? What if Kenyans want the amounts increased? You're asking for 1,000. What if they're actually happy to pay 1,200? And what if they disagree with the amounts that have been proposed? Civil servants will pay 1,000 shillings for the staff badges. What if they're happy to pay 500? And will you come up with another revision? Finally, there is something that should be also observed, and that is the rate at which some of these things are coming onto the faces of Kenyans. The public copying, housing levy, and then NHIF. There's so many things coming in the way of the Kenyan taxpayer very, very quickly. And now when we see this coming through, now ministries are also coming up with their rates.
Land rates
really
as well.
Free for all. Their land rates. You never know what to expect from other ministries. So it's open season.
There's a bill, apparently, that will seek to give penalties to those that sell seedlings, which is interesting, seeing as we've just come from a national planting green holiday, shall we call it. There's the land rates proposals that we've heard from the Ministry of Lands. There's a bill in the National Assembly on peanuts, and those who hawk and sell peanuts will be penalized. It really is hard being a Kenyan, because it's one after another. So, I mean, even if you were to do public participation, would Kenyans spend every day of their lives, giving views on this bill, that one, don't increase this, increase that, increase this. And also, we all know what happened with public participation in the Finance Act of 2023, particularly with things like the housing levy. The majority of what Kenyans said turned out to be something completely different, Sam.
Which is still a subject to court process?
Right. Yes, yes, yes.
It's interesting that you're raising a question about peanuts. And very many Kenyans and peanuts. So, you see, something is happening in this country. Just not long ago, the Madaraka Express announced that the transport fees or fare will rise by 50%. So the economy that was charging 1,000 shillings will now be 1,500. If it's business class that was charging 3,000 shillings, it will now be 4,500, starting the 1st January 2024. I think there are a lot of things that are supposed to start next year. Should we stay a little longer this year before we get there? But again, so citizens are paying debt on SGR through taxes. They'll also pay more for transport to use the SGR to travel to the coast or to Nairobi. Citizens pay taxes to pay debt, to finance education, but the same citizens will now be going back to their pockets to finance certain things, especially for higher education. Citizens pay taxes to provide health services in the public sector, but soon, once the regulations are brought to Parliament on the Social Health Insurance Fund, they'll be paying more. The rate is yet to be declared, but the President has been speaking about 2.75%. So continuously, Kenyans are having to pay for services 2 times, through the taxation, but also through these levies, charges, fees that can be reviewed at any time so that we can gain sovereignty of our country.
To pay our debt.
So that you're not at the mercy of foreigners.
Yeah, that is indeed very sad. I wanted to take a break, but just so that I attribute him correctly, the creator, sorry, he's not a comedian, he calls himself a creator, is Mushiri Mike. You know, dressed as a lady, and yes.
Just before we take the break, maybe it's something that Robert will place here that I wanted us to have a look at. With regard to our first topic today, which was the
G2G oil deal?
G2G. This is making rounds in the social media as a very robust discussion about how Kenya can actually be sidestepped as an option when it comes to regional development and integration. I think there's a railway line there in green, pipeline, all coming out of Dar es Salaam and the port of Tanga.
And you see how all of that bypasses Kenya.
That bypasses Kenya. Now, this may look far-fetched at this point, but not when neighbors start complaining about how we do things. It's all down to a question of perception, how we are perceived. Are we trusted with processes? Are we trusted with adult staff? You know, there is a reason that, for example, our eastern neighbor is not known for many things because of conflict. And that's Somalia. I mean, not a lot of investments there and all that. When a political environment doesn't deliver certainty, and when decisions start raising doubts of even neighbors, because I think those who understand geopolitics will be very, very concerned about the complaints by Uganda. Uganda is not just a neighbor, but it's Kenya's, I think, biggest trading partner. And, you know, and beyond Uganda, there is Rwanda, there is Burundi, and there is a DRC, all which used to look at Kenya as the entry point for using the port of Mombasa. And, you know, and when you think of the vision around the LAPSSET project and the LAPSSET corridor, it was meant to position Kenya to be really big in things like this, where we are seen as the entry point to the eastern side and indeed the central part of Africa. When people start having this kind of conversations, we should reflect. It's not something that we should really take lightly. And oil is a big deal. And that is, remember, oil is the one that is causing this conversation. And oil is followed by everything else. I think the economists in the room, and there are two at both ends of this table, know that oil first and
everything else
follows when it comes to trade.
Just to add to something about the region starting to wean themselves off of Kenya. So Tanzania recently had its first ever tea auction. That is something that happens traditionally in Mombasa. It's supposed to be able to trade up to 65 tons of the tea product, and what they're hoping is that it could actually reduce the cost of transportation by 50% that is usually incurred by transporting the produce to Mombasa for the auction. And what could then end up happening is that Tanzania, with this auction, could then, play host to other countries who can then go and do that. So slowly by slowly, all of these things that were the preserve of Kenya, that was sort of the jewel of East Africa, the economic hub of the region, the other countries are starting to wean themselves off of the dependence on Kenya. And it's something that we need to think about. I think it's a significant happening considering what Museveni has been saying and the plans that are there, and this map we've just taken a look at. So not sitting pretty. And I think even in terms of some of the comments and our stature and how we conduct ourselves and what we say, also how we say it says a lot to the neighboring countries.
Uganda now exports more coffee than we do.
Yes, it's an ongoing conversation that needs more digging deeper into it to see what the facts are. Because again, we live in a world where a lot of figures also coming from different institutions in the country. But I think we shouldn't ignore that, because there are certain trends that are not looking good.
So, on that note, let's take a break. When we come back, as we promised you at the start, it is our final word. Stay here on NewsGang.